And we have Girish there, Girish Kasharavalli, famous maker, filmmaker, and I know him very well, and the entire world knows him as the maker of Ghatashraddha, long back. And then we have got Prabhat Mukherjee, who is a poet. He is a multifarious personality. And we have Atulji. He was just talking about the drama, and he is also a very good actor, theatre actor, but film actor too. And Ratnatma Senguptaji, who is also a personality which we will always cherish to have amongst us. So let's start talking about the subject which has been given to you or which I have gone through is revisiting literature through films. You will all be telling that. But while you deliver your valuable speech, kindly please answer one question which I will be putting before you. Whether film and literature are two different. Number one. Number two, 70,000 years back, this human species didn't know to talk because our vocal cord was also not very much developed. We were just making sounds like all the animals. Then it took 50 years for us to speak. And what did we speak? We did not know. We wanted to communicate through mimicry in hands. Do the literature start from there? Do the literature starts from there? Or when some of our developed brain of those times, 10,000 years back, they wanted to communicate by making painting or by drawing something, that they started communicating. And then language came. So when the drawings or the paintings started vocabulary for the human species, so I think the filmmakers should take the credit of being the pioneer of literature. You are the pioneer of the literature. So those were small drawings. Under the film, we are making a film which is also the mixture of them. It's a bunch of all those small drawings or paintings. So, my question will be, should it be taken as different or should it be said, चलिए गिरीश जी का फिल्म बहुत अच्छा होता है. I would like to remind, you must have seen, many people have seen the film of Kurosava. In the entire film there was no dialogue. Nothing. Such a beautiful film. We loved, we cried. Since there was no dialogue, since there was nothing, could it be said that it is not literature? If that is a literature, then Rembrandt's painting of portraits, do they not speak many things? Can that be called as a literature? Or for that matter, if we go to Mona Lisa, does not that speak volume of things? And lot of literature have been written on that particular portrait. So when these questions are there, I hope the great people who are sitting here on the stage, my lovable learned friends, they must enlighten us, enlighten our people, and most important thing that I was telling them, it's not the persons who are sitting on the chair. Maybe many of the chair looks vacant, but whatever you say today will be recorded and will be a property of Odisha and a property of SOA, and the people will hear it for years together, because they will get their lecturer, but hardly they get Mr. Girish, hardly they will get Prabhat, hardly they will get also our Ratnatmati. So, keeping that in mind, let's start discussing. I would like to request Girish to start with this particular.
Thank you. The subject that is given to us is revisiting literature through films. We can read this one in two possible ways. One is revisiting literary works through films, or is it revisiting the literature itself through films? If it is the first option, then I would like to start my speech with a divine note, a kind of a discordant note. Because the purpose of cinema, the purpose of literature, purpose of cinema is not to, highlight or to interpret the book. They are two independent things, both cinema and literature. Though cinema is based on the literature, it will never be a faithful reproduction of the text. They are going to reinterpret the text. So that is very important. Just like, reinterpreting history itself. There are very layers of history, and in each case, we will be revealing only one layer of the history. So, relationship with history is what the historians do, and that's exactly what a filmmaker does with the literature. If you say, if you are really looking for, if you want to really revisit the literature, I request you please go and read literature. Revisiting literature through cinema is not a good endeavor at all. Because as a filmmaker, the moment he picks up a theme, the moment he picks up a plot, he starts reinterpreting it, and it no longer becomes the original story. You know the famous debate between Niraj Chaudhary and Satyajit Roy. Niraj Chaudhary, after watching Patyapanjali, said, it's a wonderful film. He gave a lot of credit to Satyajit Roy and said, but the credit should go to Vibhuti Bhushan Bandyopadhyay. Vibhuti Bhushan Bandyopadhyay, writer. Because the novel is so beautiful, the 75% of the credit should go to Vibhuti Bhushan Bandyopadhyay. And Ray countered that. He said, that's not true. Because cinema interprets things in a very different way. What is it? And how does it? The problem with most of the Indian film viewers is that they think everything is similar. They will have the text, a literary text, and they have the theatre, drama, and come and try to watch the play. There are two different things altogether. It's like, listening to Eknath's, this one, Majia Pan, what is it, which Bhimshi Joshi has made it immortal. Mahe Mahe Pandari. So if you read that, it's not the same experience that you get when listening to Bhimshin Joshi. There are a lot of other things. So that's why one has to be very careful while talking about literature and cinema, literature and theatre. The idioms are totally different. I'll tell you a small example. In literature, how do we construct a plot? We use words which are basically abstract. From abstract, the writer tries to create a concrete image in the minds of the reader. Whereas a filmmaker, the moment he places the camera, the image becomes concrete. What is his tool? It's a concrete image. And he's trying to create an abstract image through concrete material. He tries to transcend the concreteness of the image to reach a kind of ideological system. So the whole the reach itself is different. If you imagine a relationship between the product, the experience, and the ideation. In case of cinema, in case of literature, it's like yes, here. From writer, it comes to the ideas, and then from there, experience. Idea comes first, and experience comes later. But in literature, in cinema, it's actually opposite. First you experience, and then you ideate. So because of that, the filmmaker never remains faithful to the text. He looks for cinematic possibilities within the text. And the experience is always different. That's why comparing these two things itself is problematic. Because if you are not open to that these two things are different, then one ends up looking at one ends up reading the film. Film is not meant to be read, it's meant to be seen, to be experienced and then ideated. From your experience, the ideas should emerge. This is a very major problem. I think we can discuss it later on. And this is actually not only problems of cinema, I think it's a problem of all visual arts. Unless you see things, we don't tend to interpret the elements of visual design at all. And the second thing is that most often the mistake which Dheeraj Chaudhary did, that a great literature becomes a good material for a great film. It's not so. If that is the case, there would have been quite a few adaptations of Anna Karenina. Even the War and Peace, Bandarchuk's work, adaptation is the only fairly decent work. It's some, but it never. Forget about the outside this one. Look at Indian context. Why didn't Satyajit Ray adopt Gora? Because he knew that there are certain limitations which cannot bring the film, the essence of the story onto screen. So one has to know that also. So cinema, one has to, while picking a story for the subject, for the film, one has to know whether the story has cinematic elements within it. So whenever I pick up, I have made only 15 films in a career spanning 50 years, but out of that, 14 are based on Kannada literary works. What I look for, the material that I look for, content. One, how does it, develop a kind of a dialogue with the existing reality outside. Second thing is it emotionally pulled? This being a kind of a performance or performing art, if you can't hold, if it can't hold the attention of the audience, it fails. That's one of the reasons why some of the great works cannot be translated into cinema. Third, does it really lend itself to cinematic adaptations? And whenever major filmmakers adopt a literary work, he or she never follow the original text. Take for example Kurosawa. He has adopted beautifully both Macbeth and Ron, this Lear. But he made a lot of things because he was looking for cinematic elements within the subject. And through that cinematic element, he is trying to say something different, which is not the vision of the Shakespeare at all. When I made my first film, Ghatashraddha, based on a short story by Adina Megha, by that time was a very, very big cultural icon and writer. And I was just 25 at that time when I made that film. I had a lot of doubts about my ability and all. Because how can a boy of 25 make a film? After watching the film, said, I really like the film because your film doesn't resemble my film. He says it doesn't resemble because you have deviated and brought in a lot of new meaning into it. That's why it becomes your work and not mine. It's no longer mine. So whenever we look for kind of things, we need to keep these things in mind. Otherwise, we end up saying, after watching Guide, R.K. Narayan said it's a misguided guide. So that is because he was looking at a transplantation of his story on the screen, but they didn't do that. But film, as a film, it is equally important. So we need to know that difference. So that is a very important thing. And I think we can, I'll leave it at this point and then probably later come back how over the, cinema is only 120 years old, but in the 120 years old, how far it has traveled, in terms of for every 10 years or 20 years, the idioms have changed, the aesthetics have changed, because the cinema wanted to establish an identity of itself. One of the major problems they faced in the initial days was to move away from literature. If you look at the cinema aesthetic history of cinema, you see at every 10 years or 15 years, they redefine the notion of cinema. A cinema which has moved away from the literature, and later on it has moved away from painting, a cinema that has moved away from theatre. So if you understand that theatre, I'll come back to it later when doing the conversation, if it is possible, if we have time. I'll tell you how this, in 100 years, 120 years, cinema has tried to establish its own identity. And today's cinema and cinema of 1920s and 30s are totally different in terms of aesthetics, in terms of its construction. The notion of cinema is very different. So that's why if you look at a cinema of today and look for to understand the literature on which it is based, they are doing injustice to both the medium, the literature as well as the medium of cinema.
Thank you, Girish. Thank you, Girish. I have some queries of my own. These are the queries of my own. I have made films more than about 60-70 films. I am in the film industry for the last 60 years as a child actor. Then at the age of 26, I became a director. People always ask me, we have so many classics written in our Korea. Why don't you take it? Why don't you take it? Why you make your own story and then make your film? I have my answers. but I would like to hear your answer.
Not very familiar with the Odia literature, but you see, when I joined Film and Television Institute of India, one of my inspiration was Kannada literary work. Can you people listen? I'm a great admirer of a Kannada writer called Shivaram Khan, Canpate winner, Dr. Shivaram Khan. In fact, my strength comes from his writing. But so far, I never adopted any of his novels. I just wanted to adopt one novel, but Viveka adopted before I approached. And I was associate director for that, and that was that kind of thing. Why didn't I adopt any of Shivaram Khan's work is that canvas is very huge and it goes on for generations. And that kind of, if you eliminate all those things, you can make a very interesting film, but the vision is lost. So I'm not trying to do that at all. I'm trying to find a story wherein I can bring in my vision into the story, not the vision of the writer. That's why in all my films, I've made a lot of changes from the original. Some of them have deviated so much that one writer said, very grateful to you, say, you made a beautiful film, but only you have taken the title from my novel, nothing else. So that should be the spirit of it. See, say for example, in Throne of Blood, look at the way how he changes the whole thing. Throne of Blood, Macbeth's Throne of Blood. He changes all the significant details. Like there are no three witches, there's only one witch. You don't even know whether it's a witch, it's a male or a female. He makes it neutral. And then he brings in another element, Lady Macbeth. Here, Lady also is pregnant. Because she is pregnant, she is ambitious. So it's like, it's an Eastern philosophy that evil doesn't exist on its own. You have to have, we all believe, even for Ravana, even for Purushasana, we have some kind of a justification for it. They have some kind of a grouse against these people. That's why they become evil. So evil per se doesn't exist in the Eastern philosophy. So Kurosawa couldn't have adopted Shakespeare as it is. It changes it totally. And in Ron, it changes it even more drastically. The author, this one, Lear, he changes them into 3 sons, not even 3 daughters. And then, there are so many other layers. And that's how the adaptation should be. Then, there's a possibility of looking at adaptation from 2 different perspectives. One is as an independent work of art. The other is, what are the deviations that the writer, the filmmaker has brought in? So that brings a kind of an intratextual tones layer to it.
So we have Mrs. Sengupta, who is daughter of a great personality, Nabedduda, daughter of Nabedduda. I have met Nabedduda in Bombay. I have talked to him, and he is called as the master of screenplay writers or father of screenplay writers in India. He has made a screenplay mostly acceptable from Kerala to Kashmir to everybody, like Nandini, like whatever, a lot of movies in that time I have seen. There, one question had come to my mind, and now also I would like to know it, that when there is a popular book which has been sold and people have liked it, read it, And now the title of today's discussion doesn't ask you that. Why you have made so many films, and out of that, why you have not taken those books which are popular? The answer, you can give it better and I can give it better, because the one thing is that ours is visual method and they read. We have got different targets of people. The target of readers, target of visual, seeing the films are different. So I would like to ask you, which is to answer this particular question of this evening, have we deliberately tried to avoid classics or the books which have been very well accepted by the people, or we had the desire to make a film which will suit to our total making of films? What is it?
Would you like to answer, Ratnapama?
I'll just tell you one thing. When I pick up a story, I don't go by the name of the writer. I have picked up the stories by most popular writers. I have picked up stories by people like Anantamurthy, Purnachandra Tejasvi, very big names in Kannada literary scenario. And I also went to the extreme right of people, writer who belong to rebel group, and also I have adopted 2 novels by S.L. Bhairappa, who is very well known about his political leanings. And I changed it. In fact, when I decided to adopt a novel by S.L. Bhairappa, a lot of people attacked me even before I started the shoot. They said, oh, he has moved over to kind of Sanatanwadi and all that. But I totally changed the whole film, the subject. And then I showed it to Bhairappa and said, if it is acceptable, I'll give you a name. Otherwise, I'll say inspired by this. He said, no, I'm very happy with the film. You can quote my name. So that's the kind of thing. And if the film comes out very powerfully, then I don't think the writers will object. See, I have made 15 films, otherwise 14 are based on this. Made changes in all the novels, but none of my writers are unhappy. They always support it.
Passing the bus. We just play a little game here. Sorry, I will take up from where Girish left, but I'm going to tell my own little stories. Talking about Pathet Machali, I had read the book when I was about 12, and I watched the film. The film was made the year I was born. चलो ठीक मैं इसको तो ये लिख के देगा यहाँ पर So I watched the film when I was about 15, which means 7 years after. But of course I read the novel before I watched the film. Or should I continue in English? Okay. So I was, and pardon me, I mean, please spare the brickbats. I was disappointed when I watched the film. I said, I mean, why is everyone saying that it's, it has put India's cinema India on the map of world cinema. Why was I disappointed? Because when I read Pathe Panchali by Vibhuti Bhushan Bandyopadhyay, the author, two things had happened. I was trained to read stories, books, poems, but when I was watching Pathe Panchali, I was not cinema literate to that extent. The other reason is, when I'm reading the words, I'm entering the world of Opu, and that world is taking over my imagination, my experiences. I become one with the character, and I'm transported to another time and another place without. Whereas when I'm watching the film, I'm traveling to another land, but it's like going with a visa and a passport. Okay. The other thing, very naturally, that comes to my mind, Prashanti, you have said, art, literature and cinema, two different things. My father, in his autobiography, he says, my father was a very well-known Bengali writer, and he went into cinema after the partition of Bengal and the impact, economic, financial impact and so on, with Bimal Roy. And he continued to write many classics of Bombay cinema. When he wrote his autobiography, he said, my life lived on two rails of literature and cinema. So, cinema and literature are like the two rails. We enjoy participating in the journey of the characters, their lives, their experiences. We partake, we become one with the characters in the film also. But are they separate? A son and a daughter born to the same parents, are they separate? Yes, they are. They have their own identity. This is cinema, that is literature. They, in certain ways, are both narratives. They are both telling stories. But the difference is, I will here once again quote my father, just bear with me. From his autobiography, he says, Bimalda and I, Bimal Roy and I, always look to literature for story, the raw material of cinema. People can and do write original scripts for the silver screen, but we did not prefer that because it tends to be hurried. We prefer to source our films from books because a writer has already worked on an idea, on the characters, or the logic of their action and its final resolution. So, a filmmaker gets his raw material, and to a large extent what Girish said, that the possibilities, he already knows what possibilities are there and what is wanting, what needs to be added to make the alloy, make the material much stronger. So one little example, when Sujata was being made, and I'm sure most of you haven't seen it, the seniors barring, young people haven't seen Sujata, that was made, 65 years ago, I think. And nowadays, the considerations have gone down. But when Sujata was made, it was the second film on caste and objections to caste and so on. Discrimination on caste grounds. So when Bimal Roy read the story, he told Navindu Ghosh, his screenwriter, that the daughter's character, daughter meaning the biological daughter of the parents who have adopted the low caste girl, the biological daughter's character is missing in the story. So will you please discuss with Subodh Babu before we start writing? Why did he do that? When you see the film, you'll realize there's a lot of tension in the girl, the adopted child, because she sees the way the biological daughter is handled, the difference, and it pains her, and she doesn't know why this is happening, because the biological daughter is told कि वो माँ बुलाएगी, and this daughter is told कि तू माँ नहीं, तू अम्मी बुलाएगी. Why? We are breathing the same air, but why will she have a different privilege? So these are things that on the screen, when you see, you have to have the logic much clearly. When you are reading the story, if that character is not there, it doesn't really matter so much, because you are going on to the other conflict. That is one. Another thing, Navendra Ghosh himself was a very big writer in Bengal. I mean, Soumitra Chatterjee, another very major player, actor, he had told me that when they were studying Bengali literature, Navendra Ghosh was a star writer. But if we come to his cinematic outpouring, he's always remembered for Sujata, Bandini, Devdas, Tisri Kasam, Abhiman, Loafer, Trishakni, whatever, all these films. Not for his writings. Why? Why did he not write screenplays based on original stories? So he says that, when I came to Bombay, I realized that the demands of cinema and demands of literary writing are different. Cinema is primarily a dream, wish fulfillment. A poetic justice in 3 hours is absolutely must. Whereas literature is sourced from pain, from suffering, from injustice. You from sordid woes. It points out that this is happening and it should not happen. Sujata is the story of an injustice to a little girl because she's born to Achut parents. This should not happen. But when Sujata, the film, comes before us, we want the wish fulfillment that she should be happily married to the man who loves her and whom she loves. So this difference is a big difference. And he realized that he, as a writer, is happier pointing out where we as society are wanting and failing. And he, as screenwriter, he would pick up stories that had possibilities. And I'll give you one small example. I was in college, he used to bring stories and used to ask us to read and to react. So he gave one story and said, just read this and tell me, will it be good cinema? So I read it and I said, what rubbish, the first half, second half repeats what is happening. So what was the story? It was a story about how a woman who wants to be an actress is lured and taken away, and how her husband later on takes revenge and she realizes she was wrong. The film, he wrote the script and he explained to me. The film was a very good film, by the way. It was called Do Anjani. Amitabh Bachchan, Rekha acting in it. And what difference did he make? The story was about the revenge. Why he wanted the revenge. And the film becomes how he takes the revenge. Yeah? So, the visual side of it, the logic of the development of the script in the film becomes different. And so, when I'm watching it, I'm myself taken aback. I didn't spot that possibility. But a filmmaker or a screenwriter does. That is a difference between a reader and a viewer, I suppose. And one other thing, in our recent times, we've totally moved away from literature as cinema. And I have been a journalist all my life. I'll tell you, in journalism, we always use the word story. In drama, there is always a narrative or a story. Although we have moved away from narrative cinema based on conflict, we've gone into abstract cinema, we've done everything. And still, why we tell stories today not from literature. We tell stories about what is happening in our life at the moment around us. So we get our stories from television, from newspaper headlines, from our icons today. Mary Kom, our cricket heroes, 1983, Bhaag Milka Bhaag, or newspaper headlines where a man runs over Dhoni. A man runs over 5 sleeping people on the pavement, or so on. What I'm trying to say is we get stories of here and now. Most literature, most classics are forever, but they are in terms of people who lived so many years ago. So the reality of recreating the reality of their lives is also difficult. And today, when big theatre cinema is dwindling, the possibility of adapting classics or even stories like Tisri Kasam, which is a short story, Sujata was a short story. Short stories onto cinema also is dwindling. It's easier now, and not just for copyright purposes, but because people relate a little more. I'm sure people have less time for reading books than for watching news on television. We read newspapers, which meant we had to give our thoughts, our minds to the written words. When you're watching, you're flowing with spoken words. So your mind is, in a certain way, more lazy. And I would say you have become more lazy. Your demands of your mind has increased. You're spending hours to mind too as a viewer. And just one other thing, cinema, classic, this is answering your question. Classics had, like Girish mentioned, bad characters also were big. You mentioned in the earlier session, they had to be big. Bad characters, wicked characters had to be big. On screen, they get glorified. This earlier years was much more, now a little less, but a certain amount of glorification happens. And with political things happening in the country, with wicked people, with villainy, with wickedness acquiring very different undertones, say with terrorism or with war in the air, the concept of good and bad has also changed, and that is also probably one of the reasons. Thank you.
We have heard everything that you have felt, seen throughout your life. You had a father who was pioneer in film industry in many ways. and you have chosen a life of film journalism, and you have done actually a great work for films by being a journalist. So all that you have said will be recorded in the mind of the people, and all that you have said, that is a part of the whole history of literature vis-a-vis films. So we have got another great man with us, retired professor of philosophy, and he's a poet, great poet of Gujarat, and he's a writer, fiction writer, and he has got lots of experiences with them. We would like to hear from him that you are also a writer, who write fictions, and you also write poems. Can you see that there is a difference between film and the literature? Or in any way, have you felt that the film got away from the literature? Or you think that film is always with the literature and literature was always with the film? It is absolutely a package. And before you tell people and enlighten our students who are sitting here, please start with one of your favorite poetry, and then we will all of that is big. Yes, is it? You can. You start.
I'm going to speak. No, we don't need. Yeah. Can you hear me? Yes. Namaskar. So, who do I speak on behalf of? Literature is a way of life for last 50 years, 55 years. Cinema is a passion that consumes me, again for last 55 years. So it's like, I'm not going to make any choices. Actually, I would like to suggest something provocative, because that's how I deal with myself. I provoke myself, so I can go one step further than where I am. First of all, when we use the word films or cinema, it is a good idea to remember that there are innumerable ways of relating oneself with cinema. Innumerable ways. And let us accept the fact that sometimes we choose not to see films. Similarly, there are innumerable ways by engaging with literature. Endless. My watchman is listening to Hanuman Chalisa. My neighbors are attending the storytelling that goes on in the name of Bhagavad and Mahabharata and Ramayana. And I choose to sit at a corner and read an author or a text or a group of poems that no one that I know has heard of. And I'm glad that I make choices when I talk about literature and about cinema. That's number one. And therefore, when we say cinema, am I referring to what I've learned over a period of years, how to choose what film I'm going to watch and describe it as cinema? Not taking away the pleasure that is derived by a large number of people among my community and all over the world who enjoy what they enjoy. I'll not enter into debate with that. Similarly, the literature or literary text that I relate to in my own language or the world literature is again a choice I have made. I here stand for any individual among you, and you are all individuals. You are the subject of the history that is being made. You're not one of the many. You, each one of you, has the responsibility to be an individual. I mean, the word responsibility is amazing. When you respond to something, you become responsible. So when you respond to what you are watching, what you're seeing, what you are ready to go out of the way that evening, that afternoon, that morning, visit and go into the cinema house, you are acting as an individual. When you're not, you almost lost half of the ways of talking about cinema. All you will end up saying, which is fine, and that's where we start from our debate and discussion. I like the story, but after the interval, the film begins to, limp. And some remarks like that. We almost end up identifying the medium, the extraordinary 20th century phenomena called cinema, into storytelling, which it is not. It is only when you recognize, and recognition requires a little act of mind juggling. You say, cinema is not about storytelling. How do you recognize that? Not very easy, because we are temperamentally, compulsively born as storytellers, that we want it everywhere. So we can come out of the film and say, story. Kya hua? Fir kya hua? Kyun nahi hua? Vagere, vagere. Okay? So when you begin to recognize that cinema is not about storytelling but something else, you are beginning to experience cinema as a way of life. You're not getting star-struck. Your ears, your eyes, all your five senses and your mind is getting engaged with something that you've not experienced before. And thank Lord for that. It's always the first time the cinematic image strikes you. And you feel so enriched because that image is not something that has happened before. It's the first time. And when you experience cinema as if it is for the first time, every time you go into the cinema house, that's a miracle. That's good life. Okay? The same is true of literature. We are all born into a written word. We have experienced various forms of oral traditions. We enjoy conversations. We let ourselves go when we are sitting in a pub or a bar or with friends. We relax and talk away, babble away. We let our mind go. When we experience literature in that sense, when we let ourselves go, we enter into a zone which we have never been before. So there are two ways of thinking about these issues. One is the poetics, and I must say what I mean by poetics. We all need some way or the other to make sense of our lives. It's very simple. You can be 10-year-old, you can be 95, and you still engage with the question, not consciously necessarily, with making sense of our lives. When we do it, between birth and death, between experiencing our body, our sexuality, our failures, our relationships, our joys and sorrows, and our mortality, that's when we compose our own poetics. Now sometimes, or rather most of the time, most individuals love to inherit poetics, which is fine. That comes from the life of an individual within a community. Wonderful. It so happens that this part of the world enjoys being a member of a community more than being an individual. Fine. You accept it. And therefore, you are a little bit alone in the journey you are making. Accept it. You're not one of them. It would have been easier to be one of them. But it's an adventure not to be one of them. It involves a question of making yourself. The same as a filmmaker makes a film, and a poet or a writer or a novelist or a playwright or a songwriter writes as an individual. Fine. So, cinema will take you only back to cinema, not to literature. Never. That's when you begin to see films. If it takes you back to literature, you've lost it. You've lost what joy and delight cinema can give you. And there are enough number of filmmakers who do that. They do everything that literature does, that good friendship does, falling in love does. What does it do? It makes you cry, it makes you dance, it makes you look at your own body, it makes you a person, and you feel so good about it. Cinema can do that. But almost never it does it. It just takes away 1,200 rupees, it gives you, you sit down and have your haunts, and you come home and say one more film, one more thing. It's just for one more thing. It's not an experience. It's not an engagement. It's not a commitment. That's fine. If you were my close friend, I would go on saying, go and see Ho Sao Hsien. Visit Dweepa 10 times and you will know what it means to break down, cry. See Tare Zameen Par if you like that. See Jo Jeeta Wahi Sikandar. See anything that unsettles you, unnerves you, and makes you a little more human towards yourself and fellow human beings. Empathy, such a lovely word. It brings a sensitivity to being human, not only for yourself, but to everyone else. Fine. If you haven't experienced it, 900 rupees tickets, gone. But there are filmmakers who can do both at the same time. I just came out of a film of Martin Scorsese, based on a novel. And this man, like another 92-year-old filmmaker, Clint Eastwood, they're still making films which has to do with that which unsettles you, that which makes you go back to yourself and ask questions, larger questions of life, asking you to compose your own poetry. And in that sense, cinema always takes you back to cinema. Because it is such a wonderful, young little medium. It's just 120 years old. But it so happens that it can take you back to literature, not in the sense that we just talked about it as a way of life, where you choose as an individual to select the authors you will read, the books that you will have. Inscribed. Books are what we do with ourselves when we are alone. Cinema is something we see when it gets dark. You're sitting in a theatre, and I'm not romanticizing, and you're ready to hold the hand of whoever is sitting next to you.